my talk is about the African responses. And it's based largely on the responses at the 11th Emergency Special Session of the United Nations General Assembly, which convened in February 28. And March 2nd, of course, would be the period of voting. But we should also take into consideration some responses by public officials and African social media in terms of responses. But does it matter how Africa votes at the UN? And I thought I would bring that question in, to sort of preempt in Q&A. Some people asking me that. Well, Africa is one of the world's richest continents in terms of mineral resources. Cobalt, uranium, titanium, coltan, petroleum, natural gas, gold, diamonds, etc. Palladium. Now that should ring a bell. Russia is the world's largest producer of palladium, and South Africa is second. Palladium, of course, being very crucial in the auto industry. So Africa fuels global trade. And in this context of instability and sanctions, Africa, all of a sudden, would have special considerations. In addition to that, let's note that by 2050, Africa could have a population of 2.5 billion and out of 9.7 billion. And that is because of its vibrant youth population, etc. So Africa matters, and how it votes tells us something about regional alignments and realignments, transformations in the global architecture, and the global distribution of power. Reactions to crises by African nation states may be influenced by several factors. The nature of the anti-colonial struggles for independence being probably number one on the list. Secondly, leadership goals, profiles, decision-making process, the domestic politics, the political infrastructure, the nature of regionalism, within, if you have a north-south unequal development, as is always largely the case, that would have implications. And then, of course, you have the economic and strategic calculations of domestic shareholders in terms of defense pacts and so on. We'll see how this will work out, because some African countries have actually made alliances with Russia. And this is in the Sahel. We'll talk about it briefly. Then, of course, there's also popular reaction. People moving out into the streets in support or not would have an impact. And finally, the capacity of that nation state to actually react, to reject or agree to pressure, indirect pressure. So in terms of African responses with respect to the February 24 invasion, we have two camps. At first I was seeing three, but then now when I looked at the data, we're dealing with two camps with subdivisions. We have the critics of Russia who voted yes on the UN resolution condemning Russia. And they seem to reflect the interests of political elites concerned about what the breakaway republics of Luhansk and Donetsk represent, namely secession. And given the fault lines between some nation states, that definitely rang a bell. Probably to the integrity of nation states. So they were quite worried about this. And I think Nigeria, which has a Biafra secessionist possibility, Gambia, Kenya, all of them should be noted. Now, you also have this other approach, or if you want, interests, motivated by the bitter memory of European invasions of Africa. And so they view the Ukraine as a victim of similar violations and high-handed action. And this was really clearly articulated by the Kenyan delegate, pointing to the fact that the Russians were violating the integrity of the Ukraine state and, voted yes. Of course, yes to the condemnation of Russia. And then, of course, you have some who would have done this, bearing in mind a lot of Western financial investments, trade deals, and so on. Somalia, for example, voted yes. Ghana, Liberia, and so on. At the end of the day, we also have those who would be grateful to the US for wars, support against internal wars like Sierra Leone and Liberia. And bear in mind, you have the fact that some would believe in the democratic model of governance and neoliberalism. This group, Group A, comprised 27 out of the 143 member states who voted yes to condemn Russia. Note also that ECOWAS, which is a regional organization in the African context, and the African Union condemned the Russian invasion. Okay. But you have also to note Group B. Group B would consist of abstentions, pseudo-neutrality, I think we can say, equivocation, well, maybe, principled objection, and also a downright refusal to vote. They walked out, they didn't vote. Those countries would have ties to the Soviet Russia, forged in the anti-colonial struggles during the nationalist era in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 1990s. These are major waves. And when the USSR assisted liberation movements with funds and weapons and so on, in Angola, in Mozambique, in South Africa, in Namibia, the Soviet Union was remembered. You also have some elites in these states that voted no, that interpret outrage against Russia as hypocritical. And they pointed to Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and so on. Especially Zimbabwe, Namibia, Uganda as well would be in this category of states. You have countries that felt that they were being dragged into a conflict reminiscent of 1914 and 39, when Africans were forced to accept European wars as theirs and were forced to fight in support of the colonial power. And they would say, like a Madagascar journalist, this is not our war. You have countries with commercial arrangements with Russia, especially in terms of grain, particularly wheat, and of course, weapons. Russia being a major exporter of weapons to African countries, technical experts, and so on. So Uganda, Algeria would import a lot of wheat. Egypt, a lot of wheat from Russia. Sudan, these countries would be in this group. You have leaders who trained in the Soviet Union, for example, in Mali, in that group too. You have authoritarian leaders who admire Putin and give preference or pay lip service anyway to a state-directed developmental model. They think this is a cool guy. Uganda, I think, is a good example. Countries that felt betrayed by the US or the West in an hour of need, such as Ethiopia, which was given, where the Biden administration gave support to the other side. And so that is going to lead to another attempt. Well, talking about the Sahel region, the overriding principle for these countries in that zone that we see the Bronx belt would be Russian support against the jihadists who have invaded the region, especially after the Libyan fiasco. They packed their weapons and sailed north into the northwest and started to terrorize many of the countries. Russia came in with promises to help. The French did that initially and let them down, they say. So 17 out of 54 African countries abstained and did not condemn the attack. Remember, the first group did. Group B, you have 17 who refused to condemn the attack. And then you have 9 who said they're not voting, and 1 who came out right and voted no, giving us 27 countries. What does this mean? 50-50. because there are 54 African countries. And so I think we have to note this, this split in the African context. And the last point to note is that some events are taking place as we speak, and so responses are being modified. And I think that it's possible that that 27-27 split may change. For example, the military operations close to nuclear reactors, bombing of schools and hospitals, targeting of civilians and all that. The possibility is that you can have people slipping from the 27 and be joining the other group. The other thing, though, and this is my last point, racism in Ukraine also reared its ugly head. And racial profiling of African students, there were about 20,000 African students who had, racial tones, segregated transport as they tried to get away from the crisis zone, food deprivation and all that. That's another thing that would have an impact. And so we don't know how the whole thing would play out, but technically speaking, it's a 50-50 split. Thank you very much.